The Great Train Robbery is one of the most famous crimes in British history. It took place in the early hours of August 8, 1963, when a group of robbers stopped a Royal Mail train that was carrying millions of pounds in cash. The crime shocked the nation, not only because of the large amount of money stolen, but also because of how carefully planned and daring the robbery was. It sounded like something from a movie, but it really happened. The story of the robbery, the investigation, and the aftermath continues to fascinate people even today. In the 1960s, the Royal Mail often carried money between banks and post offices by train. These trains were known as traveling post offices. One of them was the night train from Glasgow to London. It was a regular train that left Glasgow Central Station in Scotland every evening and arrived in London early the next morning. It carried letters, parcels, and on that particular night, a huge amount of money. Because it was close to a bank holiday weekend, extra cash was being transported, about $2.6 million in used banknotes. That amount might not sound like much today, but back then, it was a fortune. In modern value, it would be more than $50 million. The robbery was not a random crime. It was carefully planned by a group of criminals led by a man named Bruce Reynolds. Reynolds was an experienced thief who wanted to pull off one big job before retiring. He and his team learned about the money shipment from an inside source, someone who knew about the Royal Mail's schedule and told them that a large sum of money would be on the train that night. This mysterious informant was nicknamed the Ulsterman, and his true identity remains uncertain even today. Reynolds gathered a gang of about 15 men, most of whom were professional criminals with different skills. Some were experts at breaking into safes, others were drivers or mechanics. Two key members were Ronnie Biggs, who would later become the most famous of them all, and Gordon Goody, another experienced thief. The gang also included Charlie Wilson, who handled money matters, and Buster Edwards, who was known as a small-time crook but played an important role in the heist. The group even recruited an ex-train driver to help them move the train after stopping it. The gang spent months preparing for the robbery. They studied the train's route, the times it passed certain signals, and the sections of track where it would slow down. They decided to stop the train in a remote area so they would have time to unload the money without being caught. Eventually, they chose a quiet spot near Ledburn, between Leighton Buzzard and Cheddington in Buckinghamshire. To stop the train, they came up with a clever trick. They planned to tamper with the railway's signal system. Normally, a green light meant the train could go, while a red light meant it had to stop. The robbers planned to make the green light turn red using a homemade battery-powered device. This would make the train driver stop, thinking there was a problem ahead. It was a simple but brilliant idea. They also prepared a nearby farmhouse called Leather Slade Farm to use as a hideout after the robbery. They stocked it with food, drink, and supplies so they could stay there for several days while the police searched for clues elsewhere. The farm was about 25 miles away from the scene of the crime, which they thought was far enough to keep them safe. On the night of August 8, 1963, the plan went into action. Around 3 a.m., the Glasgow to London train approached the red signal light that the gang had rigged near Ledburn. The train driver, Jack Mills, saw the red light and stopped the train as he was required to do. Moments later, the robbers, wearing dark clothing and ski masks, rushed out from the darkness. They climbed onto the train and disconnected the first two carriages, the engine and the high-value mail coach that carried the cash. The rest of the train was left behind. The robbers then ordered Jack Mills to drive the engine forward to a bridge about half a mile down the track, where the rest of the gang was waiting. However, there was a problem. Mills refused, and their substitute driver, who was supposed to move the train, didn't know how to operate that specific type of engine. Frustrated, one of the robbers hit Mills on the head with an iron bar, injuring him. Eventually, Mills, though bleeding, helped them move the train. When they reached the bridge, the gang worked quickly and efficiently. They formed a chain to pass the mail bags full of cash out of the train and into their waiting vehicles. There were 120 sacks of money, each filled with used banknotes. The entire operation took about 30 minutes. Despite the violence toward the driver, no one else on the train was seriously hurt. Once they had all the money loaded into their trucks, the robbers drove off into the darkness, leaving the train behind. The gang drove the stolen money to Leather Slade Farm, their secret hideout. There, they celebrated their success and began counting the money. They were shocked by the amount they had stolen. It was much more than they had expected. Each robber could potentially get around $150,000, which was a life-changing sum at that time. The gang planned to stay at the farm for a few days until the search for them calmed down. However, things didn't go as planned. They played board games and drank beer, leaving fingerprints all over the house. After a few days, they got nervous and decided to leave earlier than expected. They tried to clean the place, but they didn't do a thorough job. Later, they arranged for someone to burn down the farmhouse to destroy evidence, but the person never did it. This mistake would soon lead the police straight to them. When the train was discovered soon after the robbery, the news spread quickly. The British Transport Police and Scotland Yard launched a massive investigation. It was one of the biggest manhunts in British history. Officers searched the countryside for clues, checking every farmhouse and barn within miles of the scene. It didn't take long for them to find Leather Slade Farm. When the police entered the farmhouse, they found clear evidence that the robbers had been there. Fingerprints, food wrappers, playing cards, and other items left behind. The gang's fingerprints were matched to known criminals in police records, and one by one, they began to be arrested. Within weeks, most of the gang members were caught. Bruce Reynolds managed to escape for several years, but many of the others, including Ronnie Biggs, were soon in custody. The police recovered only a small portion of the stolen money. Most of it was never found. It was believed that the robbers had hidden or spent it before they were caught. The trial of the Great Train Robbers began in January 1964 at Aylesbury Crown Court. Because the crime had shocked the nation, the court was heavily guarded. The public and media followed every detail closely. The robbers were accused of conspiracy to steal and armed robbery, among other charges. In the end, most of the gang members were found guilty. The judge, Mr. Justice Edmund Davies, gave out some of the harshest sentences ever handed down for a robbery in Britain. Many of the robbers received 30 years in prison, which was considered extremely severe at the time. The judge wanted to send a strong message that such crimes would not be tolerated. Even though they were locked up, the story didn't end there. In 1965, Ronnie Biggs made a daring escape from prison by climbing over the wall with a rope ladder and fleeing to France. He then had plastic surgery to change his appearance and eventually moved to Brazil, where he lived for many years. His escape made him famous worldwide. He was often described as a folk hero, though others saw him as a criminal who had hurt an innocent train driver. Another robber, Charlie Wilson, also escaped from prison and fled to Canada, but he was caught a few years later and brought back to the UK. Bruce Reynolds, the leader, managed to avoid capture for 5 years by living in Mexico and Canada. He was finally arrested in 1968 when he returned to Britain and was later sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the years went by, many of the robbers were released after serving long sentences. Some tried to live quiet lives, while others continued to face trouble. Ronnie Biggs became a celebrity in Brazil, giving interviews and selling his story to newspapers. In 2001, when he was old and sick, he returned voluntarily to Britain and was sent back to prison. He was released in 2009 on compassionate grounds and died in 2013. Train driver Jack Mills, who had been attacked during the robbery, never fully recovered from his injuries. He continued to work for a few years, but suffered from health problems and stress caused by the attack. Sadly, he died in 1970. Many people felt sympathy for him, as he was an innocent man who had been simply doing his job. The Great Train Robbery remains one of the most talked-about crimes in British history. It inspired books, movies, and television shows. People were fascinated by how well-organized the robbery was and how the robbers managed to stop a train in the middle of nowhere. It had all the elements of a thriller: clever planning, danger, violence, escape, and mystery. However, opinions about the robbers were divided. Some saw them as daring and clever, like characters in an adventure story. Others saw them as greedy criminals who hurt innocent people and caused great harm. The robbery also led to changes in how money and valuable items were transported in Britain. After this incident, security on trains was increased, and large cash shipments were moved in safer ways. The Great Train Robbery of 1963 was not just a crime. It became a legend. It showed how far people could go for money, and how even the best-laid plans could fall apart because of small mistakes. The robbers thought they had committed the perfect crime, but their fingerprints, carelessness, and overconfidence led to their downfall. More than 60 years later, the robbery still captures people's imagination. It reminds us of a time when Britain was shocked by a crime that seemed impossible: stopping a train full of money and disappearing into the night. It was daring, dramatic, and unforgettable. The Great Train Robbery remains a true story that continues to live on in British history and popular culture.